Hello, everyone out there in podcast world. I hope you're having a wonderful day. You are listening to or watching the Service Business Mastery Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Tersh Blissett, and actually Josh is at an event, so he's not able to join us live here for the recording, but he is here in his spirit. And I know this is something he's super excited about as well, because we've talked about interplay learning a lot. We talk about training a ton on the podcast. And one of the things that we've used within my business, Service Emperor, and Josh used when he was working in the for an HVAC company was Interplay Learning. And I was able to interview Doug, and we've interviewed Brian several times, and it's the process, the program itself is amazing. For us, it's a lifesaver because we're able to do a lot of training remotely. And for those of you who don't know, we run a HVAC company, HVAC and plumbing company that's completely remote. And so we're able to do a lot of training that's remote because of the virtual reality portion of Interplay Learning. Now, would I say that Interplay Learning or a remote type training solves all your problems with training? No, you still need to have some hands-on training, doing ride-alongs and stuff like that. But it greatly reduces the amount of time that I have to bring people on site or go on site with them to do training. So it's a really great product, but it's one of those things where and I'll talk a little bit about this also whenever we're when we have Ken and Dan join us on the show. But whenever I was a technician in the field, one of the challenges that I had was, like, I was a green tech and didn't know anything, and I didn't, like, it was really learning it in the field by mistakes or calling and asking someone. But back then we had the old Nextel phones, or the chirp, the click, the chirp phones, and so it wasn't always the greatest communication out there. And so a lot of times I just learned by burning up things or trying out things after hours. But then I learned that going to trainings was something that the company would pay for. Like, that blew me away. And so I started going to supply houses all the time. And if they ever had any kind of trainings, I signed up for them. And what I also found was that about half the room was filled up with people who only came to the trainings for the donuts or the pizza that came with the trainings. So a lot of times that time that the employer is paying for is completely wasted. And there were also times that I would go to trainings and it was completely irrelevant for anything, because I didn't do chillers, but every once in a blue moon there would be a chiller part specific manufacturer that would throw an event at, or a training. They call it training. Sometimes they turn into sales pitches. And as a vendor that we purchase all of our residential stuff from. And so I'd get there and it was completely irrelevant for me, and it just complete time waste for me. And this does away with that, which is, I think, is an amazing aspect of the fact that we can do on-demand training. We can do courses. I can set up courses for my technicians. We use this program, and it's we create is gamification within the company of like who can get to the next level at a certain amount of time. They've had to compete against me before, and the person that got the most points but also beat me as well would get $100 at the end of the week or something like that. We do all kinds of different things, and it's cool to see the progression. Also, it's cool that I can see how many times they took the test before they passed it, so that if they're trying to game that system where they're trying to learn all the questions and then go through the answers, like I can see that stuff really quickly. But one last thing that I will talk about with Interplay Learning, and this isn't a pitch for Interplay Learning. We're talking about training in general, but one of the things that I really do love about Interplay Learning is the fact that whenever I'm potentially hiring someone prior to the interview process, I just have them take this test and the assessment portion of it, and it really brings to light the things that they don't particularly know or they think that they know a lot more about than they really do. And so and I always preface them taking that test with, this isn't going to necessarily break our hiring potential from you, but what it would do is show us where to train you when you do come on board with us, and that helps relieve some pressure when it comes to that aspect of the hiring process. But also, if you hear a scratchiness in my voice, it's pollen season here. We're recording this March 8th in 23, and this is the yellow snow everywhere in South Georgia. But I apologize beforehand, and thank you so much for dealing with that. But before we get started with this, with the introduction, I want to give a huge shout out to our partners and the people who make this show possible. We have Upfrog, and they do a lot of digital marketing, and I'll put links in the bio put links in the show notes as well. Sera software, which is a great, CRM platform. Company Cam, that's where they collect a lot of information, a lot of photos, so they don't have to sit on people's cell phones, technicians' cell phones. And also Emerson is our newest partner of the podcast, and so a huge shout out to them, and huge shout out to Mike Mayberry, the HVAC reefer guy. He just commented on the live stream, and I appreciate your support, man, and everything that you do for the industry. But with that being said, let's get started with the show.
Are you looking for valuable business advice to reach that 7-figure revenue mark? Do you want actionable tips to properly navigate through every business challenge you encounter along the way? Let Tersh Blissett and Josh Crouch be your guide in getting you to the top here at Service Business Mastery. Tune in as they sit down with world-renowned authors in business, leadership, and personal growth who share valuable insights about management, marketing, pricing, human resources, and so much more. Let their nuggets of wisdom gold guide you in owning a thriving, profitable, and ever-growing business. Here are your hosts, Tersh and Josh.
Hey guys, welcome to the show.
Thanks.
Hey, Tersh.
Hey, really quick, Dan and Ken. Ken, we've had Ken on the show before, not with Interplay Learning, but if you're seasoned with Service Business Mastery, then you've probably seen Ken or heard Ken on the show a couple years back, and talking more plumbing back then. And so I love having Ken on the show. And Dan, welcome to the show. Before we get started, could you guys give us a little background of yourself and how you're related to the industry?
Ken first.
Go, Dan.
Awkward silence.
We've already started, huh, Ken? All right. HVAC versus plumbing, that's the fun dynamic we have. So growing up, I grew up in upstate New York. My father had his own HVAC company. So, I was threading pipe and doing boilers and furnaces and everything else as a teenager and a kid. After that, went into wholesale for 10 years. Then I went to the manufacturing side. So I've been a regional for Daikin and some of the major manufacturers. And now I'm basically the HVAC market director for Interplay Learning. I just make sure we're building the right content, we're serving our customers, making that experience of training your techs the best it can be.
And I'm Ken Midget, and as Tersh said, I was on the show before. At that time, I was an educator, made a couple leaps since then, more into the tech world. And now I'm at Interplay Learning, and I do the same thing that Dan does, only because it's plumbing, it's better, just for the record.
That's awesome.
Pleasure to be on here, Tersh. Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Absolutely. We see each other at different trade shows all the time and get to talk. There's so often though that we don't get to share all of this. Like when you go to trade shows, it's fire hydrant of information, and even if you went to somewhere like AHR, you may have walked right past the Interplay booth because you're like, oh wow, shiny object, and then you want to go back and talk like VR, like what's what is VR? Like, my kids talk about it playing video games, but whenever it comes to training air conditioning, like most of the times people, what I hear people say is that they want to, like, they don't think you can train if you're not touching it physically. I'm sure that y'all have had that conversation with people. What would you tell someone who has never done any type of training before when it comes to VR or online training, how that you can still do that and have that similar experience to having it hands-on?
Want me to take that, Ken?
Yeah, go ahead if you want.
All right. There's a term I love to use, right? Everyone uses the term on-the-job training. What I've really been leaning into hard lately is before the job training, BTJ, right? Like, what baseline knowledge could I learn, maybe through video content or through simulating the process on a computer or a tablet or even in VR space. Like, what's all that knowledge I can learn? So when I'm on site and I have the senior tech there, like, he's not wasting his time teaching me the refrigeration cycle or teaching me all of the basics. He can go right into the meat and potatoes when we're on site. So that's how I'd answer that question.
I really like that, because so here's the challenge that I have with this training before we go on the job site. Learning like the PT chart, and then you're like, oh great, I have the theory. Like, I guess I understand the theory, but then you go in the field, there's a lot of aha moments. But I think that the video aspect of it, and correct me if I'm wrong here, I think you have the aha moment earlier whenever you're seeing it with the video training versus like just looking at the refrigeration technologies book, refrigeration, everybody's seen the book, I'm talking about, the thick book that we all had to learn through, and you learn the theories and everything else. For me, like, grains of moisture in the air, like, this is great. Like, but I didn't understand the why behind any of it, because I was just reading a book. And then I'd get in the field, and then the old timers were telling me, oh, you just throw all that out the window, because this is just beer can cold. Like just, we're not worried about subcool and superheat. We're gonna just until it starts to sweat. As soon as that big thick line starts to sweat, then you're good. And so then you have a conflict there. But for me, I was a why person. When I was training, I was that guy that was like, okay, but why? Yeah, you told me that, but why did it break? Like, why did the capacitor go bad? I don't know. Capacitors just go bad. Like, I was the guy that annoyed people to the point, well, things don't just go bad. Like, what would cause it to go bad? And you're like, it's a Chinese junk. They just don't make them like they used to. Like, that's what I got out of the conversation, because they were like, I don't know why it went bad. It just went bad. Okay. But for me, I don't feel like you can diagnose an entire system unless you know what caused the failure in the beginning. And if you're not training that way, then I believe that you're diagnosing the symptoms instead of the entire system. But what's y'all's thoughts on that?
Well, I want to touch on one more thing that you mentioned when you said the old timers.
Hey, I'm the one with no hair here talking.
And that is that, a lot of it's went by the wayside today, but there was plenty of times I had something thrown at me because I handed the wrong thing, and I wasn't working fast enough, and I was told to jump off the truck and not use a ladder, and all those things that we just really, say not to do in today's world, right?
Oh, right.
So that's one of the things that an individual training by themselves in that moment in a VR or video-based software, it gives them the opportunity to learn at their pace, at their speed, in their environment without getting yelled at. And the absorption rate is exponentially higher, right? Because you're not intimidated.
Well, the risk of a pipe wrench flying past your head because you brought the wrong pipe extender,
right?
like the air hooks.
So I also think that I'm total agreement with what you're all saying about having the base knowledge ahead of time. One of the things that VR will do in some of our simulations, it will actually teach a muscle memory to do a given task. So, I need a meter. I need to put the meter on these terminals. I need to get this type of reading. That's going to tell me what's the next step is and what direction I'm going to go. That's one of the things that VR does really well. And you don't have to do that in the VR moment with our software because you're still learning these steps, if you will. And they're a little bit generalized at time. They're not going to get very granular with a specific manufacturer, but we're going to get you there pretty close, that you're going to understand what's going on behind the wires. So to your point, you were that Y person and I was that same one. That's why I used to get a lot of fittings thrown at me. This helps with that, because when you learn the sequence of operation, it helps understand why the part does what it explains the role of the part, just like from being mechanically intuitive and understanding it once you do it. I also think it teaches someone who isn't mechanically intuitive to be mechanically intuitive, to start to understand, looking at a schematic. Oh yeah, I get it. It's right here, right? Yeah. Because they're learning how to go through these steps, and that breeds that part about being mechanically intuitive. Anticipatory, right? Helps those steps, because when they're on site with a journeyman or the skilled person, they are now knowing that guy's going to need a wrench next. They're going to need this screw. They're going to need this wire. I know we got to be putting this thermostat in any minute. These are those steps that they're learning, and they've learned that off-site, right?
Yeah,
so the efficiency is much higher.
Yeah, that's a great point. Instead of it being very reactive, it becomes proactive relationship between the apprentice and the technician. Mike mentioned in the live stream that the younger generation are using Oculus in gaming, which is kind of what I mentioned earlier with my kids playing video games. They're used to it and can use it for training, so then it's more normalized for them. With that being said, with what Mike mentioned there, do you find any resistance from the old timers like me who I don't really do video games? Like, we have, for me to be anti video games, we have every game console that's made, including a new Xbox something or another that's just been ordered for another kid. And I don't like video games, but do you have any situations where people are just like, no, I'm not putting an Oculus on. Like, that's not my cup of tea.
There's a small portion. I wouldn't say pushback, but I would say that the people that, in the total capacity of all of our customers, the customer who's actually putting on the headset and learning in that environment is probably a much smaller piece than one would anticipate. Most of our learners are learning, on a Surface Pro, on a desktop, on an iPad. That's how they're doing their simulations. So somebody who doesn't get the whole technical aspect, they shouldn't feel intimidated, because they're just doing something different. Instead of doing a material list on an iPad or a Surface Pro or whatever they're using, they're going to be clicking on where you are in the simulation. Right.
How often have y'all seen, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. How often have you seen, like, just people who are just dead set on I don't want to say beer can cold. Like, we're just going to go with 75 PSI on a suction side because we're used to R22, or, we finally figured out that 410A, we can roll somewhere around 125 PSI, and we're just going to let that go. Or, on the plumbing side of things, I don't think anything's ever really changed. It's hot on the left and cold on the right, and crap flows downhill. And I think that's pretty much how plumbing goes. But, like, you ever,
except for a tankless water heater.
Oh yeah, let's throw that wrench in there. So do you ever have anybody come on the platform and they're kind of dead set on, like, the rule of thumb way of doing things, and then they learn that oh, well, the way I've been doing this for the past 20, 25 years is wrong.
I think so. So for example, we'll get service managers to demo our platform. They've been doing it. They've been doing it for 30 years, and they're a little cranky. Like, no, I know the best way. We can't teach it. But then what happens is they'll give it to their team to demo, and their whole team is like, wow, this is great. This is awesome. So it kind of, the service manager takes back that ego a little bit and says, you know what? Maybe it's just a different way that I was taught, but this is the way that my technicians want to learn.
How often are you running into a situation where the service manager has been the tech support forever and not been like a service manager, but they've been tech support, and so they're afraid that this is going to take their job away from them?
I don't think
I threw that twist right there.
No, it's okay. That's all good. I don't think they feel threatened from their position at all. As a matter of fact, I think they feel empowered to be able to do the job that they were hired to do, which is coach sales, right?
Yeah.
And coach technicians to be better technicians, right? And get off of the bottle, if you want to be very blunt, and the phone calls all day long.
Oh man.
And they find out that all they had to do was change two wires, and you would have had it, dude. Why'd you call me? Right. So that time exponentially with 7, 8, 10, 20 technicians to manage is just consumed all day. Right.
How do you manage, like, so managing technicians is a challenge in general. Sometimes I feel like it's herding cats. Most of the times it feels like it's herding cats. But when it comes to training, I used to I had like a little calendar sitting next to me or like a spreadsheet with each technician's name and how many trainings they've gone through that year, because I didn't want one person like slipping through and me forgetting about it, and then at the end of the year to come back and say, hey, I never had any trainings. But the other one was I didn't want anybody purposely slipping through and never going to doing any trainings and then constantly having callbacks. Your platform takes away that issue, correct? I mean, it's almost a training CRM. I don't know if you would say that, but I'm kind of saying that.
I think it. Go ahead, Dan. Your turn.
Yeah, I mean, most people in our industry don't really use the term, but it's a LMS, a learning management system. Like, how can we assign content? How can we see progress? How can we see what, like you said, how can we see how many times they've taken quizzes, things like that? I have a little bit of a theory around this too. Is mandatory versus voluntary training.
Yeah.
So the question I like to ask is, I like to ask a technician, what skill set related to your job description would you like to learn? So when you start with that, they'll be like, you know what? There's a lot of these inverter compressors. Maybe that's where I want to start learning. And it changes the dynamic from like, I want to force this training onto you. Like, this is something I want to learn. Yeah, maybe you can still assign classes that make sense to their role and give them a pathway. But I think what's really fun about individualized learning is they can start building like the want to learn, the motivation to learn.
Yeah, that's and I like that aspect of it. I have in the past, like if we have callbacks, a repetitive callback situation, then we start assigning that training to a technician. The one that I really have a challenge with is whenever I have assigned that technician these trainings and they've passed these trainings with flying colors, but we still have a callback on it, and then I see that they've taken the test 4 times and then they got 100 on it, and I'm like, oh man, like now we're having a conversation about the fact that you're cheating on the test to get to the end of it. And then you're having a callback on it a week later. So is there any way that is there a way to do that other than just pure, coaching and managing that individual, which isn't always fun to say, hey, look, I know you cheated, and you're still having callbacks on this. Is there anything that that from your experience on how to avoid that or coach that better?
Well, Ken, can I take this and then you go next?
Yeah, I will.
Let me push you out of the way here. I think this is really where simulations come in, right? So our video content, yes, you can watch a video, you get to the questions at the end, you know, A, B, C, D. After enough times of seeing questions, you can kind of cheat that a little bit.
Yep.
But in our simulation courses, to get to the next step, you have to know, I put the meter here, I put the meter here. And if you're not actually taking what you've learned and applying it to that real life situation, you're not going to pass the simulation test.
Gotcha.
You might get through some of the videos, but the simulations, this is really taking what we've learned and applying it the best we can before we actually do it on the job.
Gotcha.
Yeah. It's pretty tough for a learner to skirt that, right? You're right. If they're taking it 4 times to get the 100 and they're memorizing the steps, you won. If you're the manager, you just won, right?
As long as they remember it 2 days from now. Too.
Yeah, well, hopefully. Well, they'll get shocked once or twice, and then they'll remember.
Yeah.
I think the bigger picture from a service manager's lens is that, part of coaching, right? Coaching technicians is knowing them, to Dan's point, where's their trajectory, where do you want to go, and explaining to them the value of them learning, right? What it does for them, right? So when they say, I want to do more of XYZ type jobs, or I want more calls in this area, or whatever that may be, well, the way to get to that spot is to do these things in training, right? Get proficient at these types of tasks or these types of calls. The other thing, I'm going to steal the show here with Dan. We're going to talk about the big C word of what training does, and that's called confidence, right? Doing training builds confidence, and it trickles down in a whole bunch of different ways, but it trickles down in the apprentice with a skilled person on the job site, builds confidence, right? For the apprentice to be intuitive and make decisions about things and not have to be told every single step, or those proverbial words that a skilled person doesn't want to hear. What's next? Like, you don't want to hear that all day long, right?
Oh, yeah.
You want the apprentice to be anticipatory, and the confidence in training helps that, right? But I think that's, if I had one thing I could throw out there to service managers, is to spend that time to learn them, your techs, and help guide them, right? Because they're so caught up in the minutia of the everyday thing of doing the work that they lose track of the path that they really should be trying to take.
That's true. I mean, we're guilty of that as business owners and managers too, of putting out fires all day and then not growing as a person, as a leader in the company, which is the same, as a technician. I remember whenever I was a technician, I was fortunate, and like, I didn't have a lot of outside distractions as far as responsibilities. Like, I could just focus on that and focus on learning air conditioning. And so it pretty much absorbed my life. But I know that later on, I get off of work, and that was kind of the last thing I really wanted to think about. I wasn't going to open up a manual and just start reading it. But before, like early on, and I don't know if this is the case now with individuals. I know it's not the case with my technicians anyways, necessarily. And that is, like, I would take the manuals, and I had a little flip fold file collectors right here in the center console between the seats in the van. And I'd have those, and in between calls, that's what I read. But like I said, back then, all we had was Snake on our phone to play, because it was the old Nextel that you would throw at people. And that we didn't really have the internet to surf while between calls. So like, that was how I kind of got my education, was to learn by reading the manufacturer's manuals. What happens if there's something in your platform that someone doesn't agree with, like that they are like, I don't think that's accurate? Like, has that ever happened before?
Occasionally.
You just tell them, no, you're wrong. I'm Ken. I wrote it. So
Yeah.
You argue with me?
Yeah. The right way or the wrong way. This is my way, right? Yeah.
Right.
We get feedback all the time, right? So Ken and I, we each have our own advisory boards too, and we content that's coming out now, we put through people to get, is this the way a P-trap looks? Is this the way, we're building much more that feedback loop you talk about.
So. Gotcha. Now, speak a little bit about the training, because like whenever I first started using Interplay Learning, I don't think plumbing was on it. I'm pretty sure plumbing wasn't there. Okay. The multifamily wasn't there. The solar was not there. They had said that they were going to start it at that time. This is back whenever I first started with it. And safety wasn't there either, which is a great, what do you call that, path? Group of trainings, whatever. So it took a long time. One of them was, I feel like it was drain cleaning or something like that. Like I just quit looking for it because I was like, it's just going to take a year, I figure, or so for anything to happen. But now courses are coming out a lot faster than that. Correct?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Yeah. At least once a week, we're putting a new course out at a minimum. Sometimes we look in our repository that Dan and I have access to, and we see 2 or 3 courses coming out one week. Obviously the ones that have for the virtual side take a little longer because of the artwork involved to build the assets to, put in the environment. That takes longer. So the video courses, though, we can push them out pretty fast.
Now with that, are you going back and updating any of the older ones, or they just stay in there?
We either update them or replace them.
Okay. Yeah.
And a lot of the courses we're releasing is the feedback from contractors, right? Like these are the types of courses we wanted. One that came out recently in our last advisory board meeting is, we really wish you had courses on vehicle safety. We're having more safety issues on people driving to and from the job site than actually getting hurt on the job site themselves.
Yeah.
So the next batch in Q2, Q3, we have 7 vehicle courses coming. Everything from pre-trip, post-trip inspection, like how to tie down things, trailers, how to back up on a job site, the weight distribution of your van. So this type of feedback that comes from the contractors and your listeners, that's we're building it to what the needs are.
We look at them, our customers and the advisory boards help steer where we're going. So, Dan has his ideas. I have my ideas. Sometimes we're right. Sometimes we're way off what we think should be there.
Yeah. Cool, man. Well, is there anything else before we wrap things up here? I know we've talked a lot about Interplay Learning, and we want to talk a lot about learning in general. And if you don't hear me say anything else on the show, make sure that you're training. Something that I've heard said multiple times, what happens if I train them and they leave? Well, what happens if you don't train them and they stay? Mm-hmm. And that's way worse. And I've trained individuals, they've left and then they've come back because they were appreciative of the amount of time and effort we spend in them as people. So with that being said, do y'all have anything y'all want to add there?
I think the big overarching picture here, and you're aligned with this, is with the shortage of skilled talent out there, we now have to have in-house training. Like we used to rely on there being plenty of technicians, but there's a lot of skill retiring. So how do we inspire this culture of in-house training? And that's exactly what you're talking about. Like you have to build that.
Yeah. And they have to know that there's somewhere internal that they can go to train, because not everybody can have that massive warehouse and that training facility on site.
Exactly.
Right. That's spot on.
Cool. Ken, you sound like you're going to say something, Ken.
Yeah, pretty much the same thing. From using any type of training as a recruiting philosophy, you have to get it implemented, and you have to bring it and show the path. So this high schooler that's graduating, or whatever comes in your door, or whatever you seem to find, finding the skilled person, that's pretty much gone, right? Unless you want to spend a bunch of money, and chances are that money's going to go in vain, because that person's going to have ideas and attitude when they walk in the door, and they think they're the top gun, and that's another whole managerial nightmare, right? But hiring the new person with the right attitude, and the ability that wants to learn, that desire.
Yeah.
And if you have a program in place for them, you're going to be successful, and your company is going to grow. Are some going to leave? Of course they are. That's another challenge for you as a business owner, to figure out why they're leaving. Maybe you need to look in the mirror, right?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, you're right. Hire for attitude and train. Yeah, 100%. I agree with that. So I appreciate you guys hanging out with us and sharing this with us. And if anybody wants to reach out and learn more about Interplay Learning, I will actually put a link in the show notes and everywhere, so that everybody has access to that. But don't hesitate to reach out to me or Ken or Dan. Are y'all is just LinkedIn? Is that pretty much?
That's easy.
That's the predominant way to get either one of us. We're pretty predominant. We're there quite a bit.
Okay, cool deal. Well, I appreciate you guys hanging out with us, and I look forward to talking to you guys again soon.
Likewise.
See ya.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Service Business Mastery. Now that you are equipped with essential business advice from this impactful conversation, you are one step closer to becoming the successful owner of your dreams. If this episode has been helpful to your business journey, don't forget to subscribe to the show, leave a rating, and share it with other owners as well. Visit servicebusinessmastery.com to learn more.